Greetings, my fellow freedom lovers, sovereign thinkers. Thank you for tuning to LO3 Podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful swampy Mango, South Florida. And today's date is Sunday, January 31st, 2021. It's all you fans of metal. Jeff Hanneman's birthday is today. May his soul be forever free. And anyone else who was born on this date? Ditto to you. It's funny because someone sent me a video, a real quick clip, like 20 seconds long. Joe Biden signing all these executive orders, and you really pay attention, he goes, "What am I signing?" And the person next to him says, "Sign it anyway." You know who that was? Vice President Kamala Harris, the illegitimate one. Because she is not a natural-born citizen. Well, folks, when I've seen that, I know they had dementia issues and all that, so I was highly concerned. And I was real critical of Biden in the past, and even now, based on his actions, his past history. But what he's in right now, his mental health, I'm deeply concerned. And I never wish anyone ill, including Joe Biden, President Biden himself. Never beat anyone when they're down. So when I go on these little rants, I know a lot of you out there heard my show for a long time, realize it's always based on actions. Their content of their moral character, not the actual individual themselves. It's the saying, hate the sin, not the sinner. Interesting quote there, phrase. But it has logic. It has logic and is merited for sure. Because if you do show those vindictions and grudges and wishing people ill, you're going to be cursing yourselves. By one example, getting gray real quick. There's people I've known in my life had that attitude, and it hurt them dearly. I know one person had a stroke and suffered from Parkinson's disease. That has passed many years ago. Even some of my the people I worked around was very highly negative, and they suffered as well. Do you want to be in that predicament? I don't want to see you in that mode. Doesn't matter where you're at. Always something to contemplate. If you're gonna wish ill will on people, expect it to backfire on you when at least expect it. And I say that in good faith. Alright. Well, I'm going to do a real brief, just narrate one article for you. It's from Mises.org. Came out yesterday. A wave of abusive federal prosecution is coming. It is by William L. Anderson. The violent protest at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th has long been over, but the upcoming Biden administration response is likely to do greater violence to the Constitution and the rule of law than anything the worst of the protesters could have accomplished. Thanks to the response of George W. Bush administration and Congress to the 9/11 attacks almost 2 decades ago, Joe Biden's prosecutors will have plenty of legal ammunition to go after their political enemies. It won't stop with prosecuting people who broke into the Capitol. J.D. Tosal writes, after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, horrified Americans were ready to embrace virtually any proposal that promised to keep them safe. Government officials, for their part, were eager to curry favors with the fearful public and saw an opportunity to promote legislation and policies that have failed to win support in the past. The result was a surge for authoritarianism, from which the U.S. has yet to recover. Now, with the public understandably concerned after the January 6th storming of the Capitol, we should brace ourselves for another wave of political responses that would, again, erode our liberty. We are in very certain and certainly perilous waters in the post-Trump era. Democrats want revenge, and they want it now. I fear for my friends that worked in the Trump government, with Democrats calling them to be blacklisted, harassed, and ultimately canceled. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who continues to shed any perception that she wants anything less than a soft totalitarian country, has publicly called for a media literacy initiative that reminds one of Orwellion's Ministry of Truth. In an interview with MSNBC, surprise, former CIA head John Brennan declared that Biden administration agencies are moving in laser-like fashion to try to uncover as much as they can about the pro-Trump insurgency that harbors religious extremists, authoritarians, fascists, bigots, racists, nepotists, and even libertarians. Well, based on that rhetoric, I can tell you this, folks. This is not for the narration. John Brennan is a communist pig. Plain and simple. All right? Not surprisingly, there was zero pushback on his statement from the mainstream media, and one suspects that probably most mainstream journalists today would not mind seeing large numbers of people they dislike being hauled off to prison or just plain disappearing at the hands of the authorities. For that matter, the Trump presidency was hardly the libertarian moment, and Trump gave one the sense that he could control the flow of news. He would gladly do so. Whether or not one believes he was cheated out of the office in the last election, for him he claimed and won in a landslide, and called for an official election results be overturned, and hardly leave one surprised at the D.C. rally turned off an out-and-out Donnybrook. Unfortunately, the violence that followed has given the Biden people the fig leaf they need to move against the Constitution and the rule of law on many fronts, all while claiming they are restoring democracy. The United States could, well, be at a tipping point at which whatever pretense we had toward constitutional government can cast aside for a pragmatic state that addresses the so-called needs at hand and is not bound by legal nice ties. For now, my guess is that Biden will unleash federal prosecutors who will face no constraints whatsoever, and that means a lot of innocent people are going to have their lives ruined. Actually, it'll be his little minions, a la Kamala Harris, because he doesn't have a clue right now, to an extent. And I'm not defending Biden either, folks, okay? So I'll always call him a New World Order butt boy, all right? But I will continue on here. Before going into more detail, I explain why the Bush administration nearly 20 years ago made Biden's job much easier for him than it ever should under the rule of law. In the early 2000s, I began to write the abuses that accompany the expansion of federal criminal law and published with Candace E. Jackson in a number of outlets, including Regulation, Reason, and Independent Review, and the Mises page, because of what Jackson and I called the highly derivative nature of federal criminal law. The actual charges are compiled from actions that usually are only prosecution under law. It is easy for federal prosecutors to draw up a large list of charges that are hard to fight, have draconian penalties, but also involve criminalizing actions that harmed no one, and certainly did not harm that is up to standards of criminal conduct. In the hysterical aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, Congress rushed through the Patriot Act, which Joe Biden claimed to have written almost single-handedly, probably an exaggeration, which is true. He's a drama queen, but he voted for it. End of story, folks, okay? So I will continue on here. A law that even at the time legal experts doubted would be effective in preventing acts of political terrorism, but that allowed federal prosecutors to throw other crimes under the umbrella of terrorism, thus permitting them to box in defendants and force them to plead out lesser charges and receive substantial prison time. At that time, civil liberties groups like the American Civil Liberties Union, along with media entities such as the New York Times, served as a last semi-effective role in blunting the more outrageous attempts by prosecutors to expand their powers. The NYT had not shown the same restraint during the 1980s when Rudy Giuliani abused his powers in the infamous Wall Street prosecutions instead of allowing Giuliani to break numerous federal statutes in the paper crusade to fight capitalism. This time, however, it is highly doubtful that either the ACLU or the media will do anything but be cheerleaders for the Biden DOJ, given that the government says it will specifically target what is seen from the right, something the NYT recently praised. A couple of recent incidents regarding the media and the so-called conservative and that threat are instructive. It's interesting because I did one on the Reason. Many of them said were against Patriot Act 2.0, they call it. So let's let you folks know. That's from the Reason. I did a show on it, so you can look it up. And I think it was like last week. Shortly after a couple weeks ago, shortly after the January 6th riots, a number of mainstream news outlets breathlessly reported that the leaders of the protests actually were planning or kidnapping, assassinating a number of political figures. Not one mainstream news outlet questioned the Fed's claim. Shortly thereafter, however, CNN, which gave the original charges massive coverage, reported that the Department of Justice was walking back its original statements. Not to be done, the Associated Press, on January 11th, presented the specter of armed uprisings all over the country. The FBI is warning of plans for armed protests at all 50 state capitals and in Washington, D.C. in the days leading up to the President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration. Stroking fears from bloodshed after the last week's deadly siege at the U.S. Capitol, the dispatch continues. An internal FBI bulletin warned, as of Sunday, that the nationwide protests may start later this week and extend through Biden's January 20th inauguration, according to two law enforcement officials who read details of the memo to the Associated Press. Investigators believe some of the people are members of extremist groups, the official said. As we know, there are no armed uprisings, no right-wing armed mob storming capitals, and no massive protests. Now, on Inauguration Day, there was mob political violence and lots of it, but the mob were leftists, and the cities were Portland and Seattle, and the national media saw little reason to publicize the protest as they did not fit the narrative. Exactly, because it was convenient for them. Even the January 6th riots, as bad as they were, did not fall into the category of a coup, no matter what journalists and other political pundits were claiming. David French went even so far as to claim it was a Christian insurrection, because some of the protesters said they were Christians and some played Christian music on a loudspeaker. While it was an ugly scene, nonetheless, does anyone, at least besides David French, really believe that the vast government regime known as the United States of America was in danger of being overthrown by a mob led by someone in a buffalo costume? Yet the same journalistic and political elites who excoriated, Donald Trump for sending some agents to protect the federal courthouses in Seattle and Portland from Antifa mobs appear to have no problem with Biden dispatching thousands of federal troops to turn Washington, D.C. into an armed camp. It is the same kind of overreaction that leads the media and public elites to demand that the government engage in massive surveillance of half the country. Not all who are considered to be on the left are good with Biden's internal spy planning, including Tulsi Gabbard, the former member of Congress, who angered fellow Democrats with her appeals to civil liberties during her appearance in the presidential primary last year, National Review reports. What characteristics are we looking for as we are building this profile of a potential extremist? What are we're talking about? Religious extremists, are we talking about Christians? Religious extremists, are we talking about Christians, evangelical Christians? What is a religious extremist? It's somebody who's pro-life. Where do you take this? Gabbard said. She said the proposed legislation could create a very dangerous undermining of our civil liberties, our freedoms in our Constitution, and a targeting of almost half the country. You start looking at, obviously, have to be a white person. Obviously, like male, libertarians, anyone who loves freedom, liberty, maybe has an American flag outside their house, or people who attended a Trump rally, Gabbard said. Unquote. So, even more eye-opening is the missive in the hard-left publication Jacobin has launched against this round of surveillance. Now the publication that is openly nostalgic about the former East German hardly is going to champion civil liberties or even basic freedoms. But the people that are politically astute enough to know that a government with vast surveillance powers isn't going to stop at going after political conservatives. However, such legislation may be justified. With liberal-sounding language, there's absolutely no reason to believe authorities wouldn't use new powers to target groups that had nothing to do with Donald Trump or Trumpism. Police almost certainly infiltrated Black Lives Matter protests last summer, and American law enforcement has a long and ignominious history of targeting progressive groups, not to mention socialists, trade unions, civil rights activists. As this theory suggests, the premise behind any new anti-terrorism law will also be wrong on its face. The American state hardly faces excessive restrictions on its capacity to surveil, discipline, and punish. The FBI, to take an obvious example, already possesses considerable power to investigate groups suspected of extremist activity. The problem is that the traditional gatekeepers of civil liberties that we once had in the media and in political and academic circles has disappeared in the maw of political tribalism. Matt Taibbi, a former writer for Rolling Stone and now independent journalist, sees mainstream journalism a little more than an echo chamber for progressive politicians in which journalists seem to pretend they are players in the version of the West Wing. As it says here, West Wing was General Hospital for rich white liberals, a 7-season love letter to the enlightened attitudes to the boo-in paradise demographic. If that, the self-image of the national press, is no wonder they make people want to vomit. The coverage of Biden's inauguration, another celebration of those attitudes, was an almost perfect mathematical inverse of a late-stage Trump reporting, a monument of groveling sycophancy. John Heyman at MSNBC compared Biden's speech to Abe Lincoln's second inaugural and suggested that the sight of the Clintons and Bushes and the Obamas gathered for the event was like the Marvel superheroes all back in one place. This was not the first post-election Avengers comparison to be heard on cable. Oh my goodness. Talking about a comical skit there, right? Wow. Rachel Maddow talked about going through half a box of Kleenex as she watched the proceedings. Talk about a crisis actress, right? Wow, this is like. Hey, I'm going to proceed here. Sorry, my friends. Chris Ross on Fox said, Biden's lumbering speech was the best inaugural speech I have ever heard. John Kennedy asked speech included. I read the speech, folks. Oh, man. I'm just sorry. Talk about Twilight Zone, right? Bizarro's my Lord and Savior. Good grief. And I'll continue on here. The joyful tone was set the night before by CNN's David Challen, who said the lights along the Washington Mall were like extensions of Joe Biden's arms embracing America. You know? Journalists who are not going to claim that a bunch of lights and paper bags symbolizing the Joe Biden group hug are not going to intellectually or professionally capable of taking a hard look at the government's attempt to arrest the imprisoned political and religious conservatives and libertarians, since they have convinced themselves that all these people constitute a dire threat to what is left of the republic. They more likely will serve as a public publicity arm for the DOJ, as long as prosecutors stick to going after men in buffalo suits waving Trump flags. To be depressingly honest, the only barrier to the Biden administration launching of an American version of a Stasi against dissenters on the right will be the individual conscience of those in charge of the spying and making arrests. Much of the Democratic Party and most of the mainstream journalists seem to have no problem with criminalizing speech and launching a regime of mass arrest and imprisonment. As I see it, we no longer are looking at threats to liberty in the abstract. For years, I have launched missive after missive at federal and sometimes state prosecutors are not feared for my own safety and liberty, save a few death threats that I received when I aggressively wrote against Michael Nifong, the dishonest prosecutor in the famous Duke Lacrosse case, and I didn't take those seriously. The situation is different because those who were gatekeepers of liberty now have decided that itself is a threat to our well-being. When the New York Times comes out against the speech, against free speech, when journalists calls for the power of the state to be used against journalists they don't like, we turn the corner and are headed for the abyss. No, I don't expect to be hauled off to a concentration camp because I have written articles of critical federal prosecutors, but this country is now building a critical mass of journalists, college professors, and administrators and political figures that might see concentration camps and other re-education devices as being legitimate political tools. We are now as far away from such a dystopian future as one might think. Federal crime law provides these anti-liberty groups the kinds of devices that can be used to criminalize speech and turn garden variety dissenters into criminals. We should not be surprised if ambitious U.S. attorneys in the Biden administration cheered on be the likes of the New York Times and MSNBC. Decide it is time to do just that. Oh yeah, so always got to see it that way, folks. And I know it sounds like a brief, but a little bit over 20 minutes. But it's a good article to narrate and share with you and give you my intake. It's just an example of the war on terror. It's against its people. That's tyranny, treason to the extreme. The double-speaking bobbleheads, the pundits, the so-called the paper activists out there. They just love to hear themselves talk. All you gotta do is just examine. That's why mainstream media sucks. Don't need them. Don't want them. Always examine everything in a bigger picture. It's like art. It's a reflection of society, not the other way around. One thing I'm very disingenuous. Got technology. And a handful of still people out there don't want to utilize it to enhance themselves. But a positive note. There was a great awakening. Now you see it not just here, but around the world. 10th Amendment stance. And we got stuff in the books pertaining to these things. On the state and local on the resolutions. You can start off with the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, and there's other stuff from the Patriot Act. Resolutions in there as well. Like 7 states and 400 municipalities have such that we're not going to support things like this. It's time to give them a reminder. Whether it's from your state or a municipality. Let them know what you're gonna do if this gets enforced. You're gonna say no, you're gonna nullify it, or you're gonna belly up. That's how you gotta see it. So remember, folks, 10th Amendment is the answer, and the founding fathers made sure that would exist. So always, don't comply, nullify, and let them know it's unacceptable. We're not going to enforce it. And that will be it. I thank everyone for listening. Plus, feel free to download and share this right your social media networks. If you have any questions, comments, and you see something that's interesting you want to check out, whatever you do, please send your correspondence to Decorum. Furthermore, I'll leave the footnote of this article on my speaker page, and I'm going to expect to do the clip as well. The quick 20-second clip of Joe Biden so you can really make your own judgment. And if you want to contact me, you can hit me at LokiLuck3, numbers 03 at protonmail.com. I'm just letting the Gmail account linger, okay? So if you want to send your comments or correspondence, that's the one I reuse the most. And if you want to do a donation, you can hit me at paypal.me or cash.app/LokiLuck3. And if you want to do a donation to Mises.org or become a member, I would be greatly appreciated. Because the whole goal is this, folks. I'm not here to make money off of them. We're here to spread the message. And Mises I support dearly as well. Okay? So once again, thank you for your time. Plus, always remember that demoniac resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep on spreading the love. And may your guardian spirits be with you.